A lot of work has gone into all the things that you see today from lots of different people. And we're just so grateful for what each of you bring to our community, your giving, your serving, and how we're able to reach other people because of what you're doing. And I just want to show you, we love to celebrate, and so we're going to celebrate today. But I have a picture of where we started 2 years ago. Some of you might find yourselves in there. And then we launched the church on December 3rd of 2023 in this building. We have another picture. That's where we're at now. And so Radiant Life, it's growing. We're reaching people. And in recent months, we've even been able to put our services online. Can we thank the production team at the back? Over the last few months, we've started having regular visitors to our online content in India, Vietnam, South Africa, Mexico. Like, we're reaching the nations, and that production team is part of who is fulfilling some of the prophetic words that are on this house. So isn't that amazing? Yeah. I just love it. If you want to get involved, see those people. They're great. All right, well, this morning, I want to invite you to just kind of explore with me what I feel like God is inviting us to as a community, as a church, but also us as individuals. And it's part of what distinguishes us as a church in this region, I believe. And so if you've been around us for very long, you know that our mission here at Radiant Life is that we are inviting people to know God, to belong to family, to experience freedom, and to be empowered to make a difference. And see, in essence, we want people to live radiant, right? We are Radiant Life. We want people to live radiant. And see, while that is our mission, how we pursue fulfilling that mission is really important to us. And so our dream team knows our core values. We go over them all the time, don't we? And we really instill them in everything we do so that it doesn't matter what you attend connected to Radiant Life. It should feel the same. We want the guests and the people that come to us to experience the same kind of things, whether they're in littles, in our little kids program, or whether they're in students, or whether it's Radiant Life Women, or whatever it is, our values are the same. And our core values are this: we are presence people, we build big people, we pursue excellence, and we choose joy. This is our culture. And so I just want to talk through that a little bit. See, our focus is on building big people, meaning we create leaders who create more leaders. See, we have a high value for the gifts and the callings that are in individual people, and our primary focus is on helping people develop and grow so that they can step into their purpose, right? And so we're going to also do everything we can with excellence. And a shout out to our dream team, because even we've had people visiting ministers who visit a lot of churches, and they say to us, your team carries a spirit of excellence, because they've seen it in the things that we do, our services or our team meetings or just different things, and they don't even know that that's a core value of ours, but they see it in operation in our team. We just clap for them. They're amazing. And then we choose joy because church should be fun. And Jesus was joyful, right? People have told us that we have the best greeters in town because you'll find them out there holding signs, sometimes dancing, greeting people, such as "you look radiant today," or however people find them. But we're actually commanded to serve God with gladness. Did you know that? Right? Psalms 100 verse 2 says, serve the Lord with gladness. And that's just not in church on a Sunday morning, but everything we do is service to God. So we need to be people who are full of joy in our lives. And then lastly, we are presence people. And this is actually what I want to focus on today, because I believe God is inviting us to be presence people as individuals. And also as we come together, we are to be a presence-centered church. And so I'm going to unpack that a little bit today, and I want to invite each of us to make a choice to be presence people in increasing ways in our homes, in our workplaces, in the schools that we attend, in whatever it is that we find. See, Radiant Life people are presence people. And we want this to be known about us. We want to be known for joy, for excellence, for creating leaders and equipping people, but without God's presence, what are we doing? See, right, our calling is not just to be a church that does things for God, but does things actually with God. See, we want people to experience God's manifest presence, not just that he is there somewhere. And so we have a dream as pastors that it doesn't matter what you attend, doesn't matter if you're serving in Littles or you're attending any of our events, but that we are overflowing with so many testimonies coming out of this place that people who come to our events can't help but experience the goodness of God. And so testimonies are a core value for us. And as we steward that, we're seeing there's just testimonies are happening. And what we love to see is it's not just testimonies happening in here, it's testimonies happening when you're at home. See, that means we've fulfilled something because it doesn't just stay here. It's actually happening as authentic parts of our lives. See, we are presence people. So we don't measure success by busyness, but by did he come? Right? Because if we have hundreds of people packed in here, but God's presence doesn't come, we're missing something. Right? We owe the world an encounter with God. And I want to be a part of a church that Jesus wants to come to. Right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about God's presence this morning. But when his presence comes, heaven invades, and it's not something that you have to try to do. Healing shows up, miracle shows up, deliverance happens, people are saved, mindset shift. There's strongholds that are broken. And so today we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to move into some prophetic activation this morning. So if you've been around me very long, you will know that Moses is my favorite Bible character. Since I was a little girl, I have loved Moses. I named my baby doll Moses and cut off her hair, I named my pet rabbit Moses. I loved Moses. And I think what intrigued me most about Moses was just all of the encounters with God he had. If you read the book of Exodus, there's things like a glory cloud showing up. There's miraculous food coming into the people's lives. There's water from a rock. It's just encounter after encounter after encounter with God's presence. And his story is so supernatural. And so Moses was tasked with getting the people freed from Egypt, which he did, and then he was to take all 2 to 3 million people into the promised land. That I can't even imagine. 2 to 3 million people, he was supposed to corral them and get them to where God was calling them. And so in Exodus 33, this promised land, it's described as a land flowing with milk and honey, meaning there's full of abundance and provision and all of the things that God had for the people, because there, the Israelites were to take over Canaan, the promised land, and what they would do is God's presence led them with a pillar of fire or a pillar of cloud. And so wherever the pillars of fire or cloud went, they followed. And it was a visible manifestation of God's presence. So in Exodus 33, God tells Moses to get going, get out of the wilderness and go into the promised land. And God actually, at the beginning of Exodus 33, tells him, I'm going to send an angel with you. But when we read in Exodus 33, verse 12, Moses wasn't satisfied with an angel. How many of you would just like an angel to show up and help you? But Moses said, no, I actually don't want that. This is what he said. He said in verse 12, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. Then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I will do the very thing you have asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. See, did you catch that? Moses said, if your presence does not go with us, I don't want to go. Meaning, he would rather stay in the wilderness with God than go into the promised land where everything they could want is there, but without God. See, he valued God's presence so much, not as an extra or a nice to have, but as the thing that distinguished him, the thing that was most important and most valuable to him. And see, God's presence is our distinguishing mark. See, as a presence people, God's presence is what distinguishes us. See, we're not just religious people. Religion is good, and it looks good on the outside. It produces rules and good things, right? Good behaviors. But it's God's presence that transforms us. It's encounters in his presence where we realize God's real and he loves me and something in our lives change. And I want to share a testimony with you that happened just a couple weeks ago. See, in worship here, did you sense God's presence? See, we rely on God's presence. We're just focused on him. Yeah, we don't have the worship team and all of the things that some other places might have, but we worship and God comes. He likes to come here. Well, so a couple weeks ago, there was a young person that came in, and they were experiencing a lot of heaviness. And they sat during worship and just sat there. That's all they did. But they're in this environment of God's presence, right? It's a good place to come if you're not feeling great. Come to church. So as they're sitting there, someone else in the room had a vision. And in the vision, they saw Jesus go to that young person, and light from Jesus started flowing into the other person. All of us were just worshiping. Jesus is encountering someone. And guess what? In the days that followed, the person who saw the vision was able to share that they saw fruit from that encounter in that person's lives. The heaviness that had been there before wasn't there. There was a new brightness in their life. Things changed in God's presence. See, we're presence people. We value God's presence. And that's what happens as a community when we come together and we're focused on his presence. You're part of creating an atmosphere where Jesus is like, yeah, I'm coming in there. I want to touch and heal and do all the things. You know, we've had people walk in the room with pain, and it leaves as soon as they come in here. Why? Because we value God's presence. We're creating a place of his presence. See, we're not defined or distinguished by our programs, right? But God's presence in the programs. See, we are presence people, and Moses was a presence person. See, he knew where God was taking him, but he said, no, I don't. He didn't just ask for a map and let me go on my way. He said, no, I don't want that. I actually don't even want a map and an angel. I want you, God. I want you to be with me as I do the things that you've called me to do. See, we're called to be presence people, and his presence is what distinguishes us. It's inviting him to show up in our daily lives, and we lead, or he follows, or he leads and we follow. So when Moses and the Israelites were in the wilderness, they never moved unless God moved. Right? They were following the pillar of fire, the pillar of cloud. Unless that pillar moved, they did not move. They just stayed there. God's presence set the pace for them. And at the center of their lives was a cloud. The cloud rested over the tabernacle, and all the Israelites were camped all around the tabernacle. The cloud was at the center of their lives. And see, as a church, we want to center our lives around God's presence. Right? We're going to be a presence-centered church, presence-centered people. So when he moves, we move. When he doesn't move, we don't move. We stay and do what he's calling us to do. See, presence people aren't people who connect with God on Sunday and then go and live their lives. They're people who carry God's presence every day into their daily lives and advance the kingdom where they are. We just finished our School of Transformation fall semester, and we had a great testimony night the other night where students were sharing what did God do in their lives over the fall semester. And so one student shared that Jesus invited her to go to lunch with him and to coffee with him. That is being a presence person. That's going to coffee and inviting God's presence and doing whatever he shows to do when he shows up, right? Isn't that amazing? Those are the types of people we're wanting to be, where we bring Jesus into our community. See, as you get so connected with God's presence, his presence just starts flowing out of you. Then your shadow starts to heal people. Things happen by accident that you maybe could have tried to do. So we looked earlier at the pictures of Radiant Life as we've grown, but some of you may not know how we started. So in 2022, Pastor Craig and I felt like God was calling us to start a church. That was not on our radar. We were not people that were like, we're going to go start a church. Some people want to do that. I don't know. But it wasn't our radar. And so most churches usually gather a launch team to start. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we didn't feel like that was what God wanted us to do. So in January of 2023, the two of us started in our office. And every week we had church, just the two of us. We'd pray, we'd worship, we'd spend time in God's presence. And after some weeks, more people started joining us. There was one, and then there's more, and it just grew like that. And so by the fall of 2023, by the fall of 2023, we were in need of more space. The little room that we were meeting in was full, and that all came from being focused on his presence. Right? And I've got a video to show you how we started. So in fall of 2023, we started looking for a building, this building, and we looked everywhere. We really couldn't find a place. But in prayer, I felt God tell us to talk to a certain person. And so we called, and here, he knew of this space right here. It wasn't advertised. It was this production studio that wasn't being used anymore, but God's presence led, right? It wasn't what we could do in our own effort, because that produced nothing, actually. But then God led us here, and it's been an amazing place for us to grow and to expand. And so we are called Radiant Life. And that comes from Isaiah 61, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." And so when we say arise, shine, that shine, they didn't have light bulbs, so it wasn't like turning on a lamp. Instead, it was more connected to fire. So arise, be lit on fire. Fire radiates its warmth. You can experience its light and warmth from the fire. And that's why there's a fire in the center of our R logo. See, it's not us shining with our own effort, but it's the fire of God touching us and enabling us to live radiant. So radiant, we want God's glory and his presence to radiate from our church, to transform us, that we would carry his presence to the people that we interact with. And you're called to carry so much of God's presence that it actually can't be contained, but instead it radiates out of you. And then life, this is connected to abundant life, the wholeness and healing that God has for us, because we shine best when we're whole and healed. You know, when we've dealt with the pain and the trauma in our past, when we choose to forgive, when we walk in freedom, we shine best that way. And transformation comes from encounter with God's presence. See, the culture of heaven is presence-centered. There's nothing disconnected from God's presence in heaven. And that's what we want to experience here. You know, Jesus taught us to pray on earth as it is in heaven. And so in heaven, everything revolves around God's throne and his presence. And it's to be that way here as well. So we value heaven's ecosystem. We become a place that heaven loves to show up because we value him. Right? In the Bible, Jesus ruined every funeral he went to. Peter's shadow healed the sick. Paul's hankies healed people and cast demons out of people. Yeah. Right? I've had someone say that their pain leaves when I get near them. Like God just leaks from us when we create a place for his presence. See, how does that happen? We've got to cultivate being a presence person. All right, so back to the story of the Israelites. They weren't meant to wander in the wilderness for so long. Like God had a purpose for them. He wanted them to take the promised land and extend his rule and reign. to make it a place where his values were lived out and where the Israelites were a blessing to the surrounding nations. And so God says to them, I'm going to take you to a land flowing with milk and honey. And he says that in Exodus 15. But guess what happens? After that, they go 3 days without water. That doesn't seem very milk and honey-like, does it? See, their words were, the promises that God had spoken over them were tested with fire, because authority comes on the other side of that fire. So you can't do what God is asking you to do with your current level of faith and authority. It's going through those things is what gives you that authority and what builds your faith. You know, one of the most frequent testimonies we received this past week from the School of Transformation students was that they grew in courage. That's powerful. You can't step into your identity if you don't feel courageous on the inside. Right? They grew in their identity when they knew who they are and who God says they are and who God is for them. And as you do that, courage rises and you begin to step into the things that you're created for. Right? It's hard to go out and pray for the sick if you don't believe God wants to show up through you. Right? But when something shifts in your identity, when you know his love, you become a powerful person. And so God takes the Israelites through the wilderness, and on this journey of, as they're in the wilderness, he's providing everything for them. But when they get to the promised land, he partners with them. Right? In the wilderness, manna was provided supernaturally every day. But in the promised land, the manna stopped. They had to take over cities. They had to expel giants. They had to take the land. So God took them out of the season of circling in the wilderness and into a season of advancing. And I want to declare over us, we are in a season of advancing. In your personal lives, you're in a season of advancing, and we're moving forward. The things that you've been circling for so long, it's time to step into the promise that God has for you. See, we cannot, though, exercise our faith beyond what we believe is possible. It's why it's really important to be presence people. We have to know God and have his presence with us, not just a map and telling you to go do whatever it is. See, allowing him to show you what to do and when to do it. So what has God promised you? I don't know. If you look at the slideshow that we have at the end of the service, you'll see some of the snippets of prophetic words that we put up there for you that we've received over the past couple years. Things like we have a global calling, that we're an apostolic center, our church will multiply, our kids will be powerful in the Holy Spirit. All of those things are words that God has said, but they don't just happen, right? We have to partner with him and step into taking that land. And so God has a purpose for you as a presence person. Israel entered the promised land in order to establish God's reign, and your purpose too is to grow the kingdom wherever you're placed. You're not meant to blend in. You are meant to be a distinguished presence carrier. And so I'm going to share another testimony from our school. One of our students recently shared how she's been carrying God's presence at work. Right? She has her office set up in a way that honors God's presence. It's decorated for Christmas, and I've seen the pictures. It's very beautifully decorated for Christmas, and it is very clearly Jesus-centered. There's even a thing that she has on her desk with verses for different things you might be dealing with, anxiety or whatever. And what her office mates are saying is they walk by and they're like, wow, I want to go sit in there. She's playing worship music. Now people are asking her to pray for them. These are people who are not believers. They're not following Jesus. But she's extending God's presence in there. They're even coming in and getting a verse on anxiety and going and give it to someone that needs it. That is a presence person. That is an example of what it looks like to take what you're receiving and walk it out and extend God's presence and his kingdom in our daily lives. See, what promises are you carrying? Every promise has resistance. Every promise has resistance. That's why you're given the promise. but it also has God's presence attached to it. You're called to be carriers of his presence wherever you go. You are a walking encounter. Right? So in worship, when you experience his presence and then you go home, you don't leave his presence here. It goes with you. And it's supposed to be overflowing into every space that you encounter. So the atmosphere we create around our lives matters. So God led the people through the wilderness to the promised land. Joshua has become the new leader. You can turn in your Bibles to Joshua chapter 6. There's just too many verses. I have to just pick and choose because these are whole chapters that you could read, okay? But so in Joshua chapter 6, or actually, no, let's start in Joshua chapter 3. So they first come to the promised land. And in order to get to the promised land, there is a river that they have to cross. And the Jordan River is at flood stage. So if you remember, 40 years earlier, they had to cross the Red Sea in order to get out of Egypt. And when they crossed the Red Sea, God supernaturally parted the water for them to get across. And so now here they are. They get to the Jordan River. They realize it's at flood stage. There's no way for them to get across. And again, they're like, we got to have a miracle. We need God to do something. So Joshua receives direction from God. And in Joshua 3, starting in verse 12, this is what God told him. Choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. So Israel had been waiting for this moment. Imagine, this is the moment when they knew they would cross into the promised land. They had been waiting more than 400 years for this promise to be fulfilled. But Joshua didn't just send them all in, like, go, conquer the land, just run in and do whatever you want. He actually got direction from God, and God's direction was that the Ark of the Covenant, that the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which was carrying God's presence, would go first. As soon as the ark, which carried God's presence, as soon as the ark and the priests touched the water, the miracle happened. The water stopped. See, his presence caused that whole miracle to happen, and God wants to do the same thing with you as you partner with his presence. So I don't know what your promise is, but I guarantee you it needs supernatural intervention. God doesn't give us small things to do. It requires his presence in order to do it. See, he doesn't want you going after things in your own strength. He wants to partner with you the same way he did with the Israelites. So then in verse 14, the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. As soon as the priest who carried the ark reached the Jordan, and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. Did you notice that the riverbed didn't become dry until they took a step? Right? As people, I don't know about you, but I love to have all the answers before I take a step. Don't you? Some of the things God's calling you to, don't you want to have like 10 confirmations and all? God is actually calling us to be people who know his voice and follow what he says. And so here, that's, oh man, as soon as, though they crossed, as soon as he touched the water stopped. They were able to cross into the promised land. And then they are tasked with taking ground. And again, Joshua gets direction. He's a presence person. He loves God's presence, and so he gets direction. He didn't just send the Israelites in to go claim their promise. He's like, God, what do you want us to do, and how do you want us to do it? So go to Joshua chapter 6. So the first thing that God leads them to was the city named Jericho. And Jericho is a massive walled city, and it was very well protected. So again, Joshua relied on God's presence because wisdom would tell him what all the other armies did is that they would build siege ramps up to the city. And so they would take a lot of dirt and build a ramp, and that would enable them to crawl up and go over. But Joshua didn't do that. The other thing they could do is maybe circle the city and starve the people out so they didn't have food and water. That's what happened with Jerusalem years later. That would take months to do also. So Joshua was told in verse 3, march around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns or shofars in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, shofar, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in. Do you see how God sometimes calls us to do things a little differently than our own natural wisdom? So for 6 days, they were to march around the city 1 time, and the priests carrying God's presence, carrying the ark, were to blow the shofars. And then on the 7th day, they were to march around 7 times. And this is what it says about the 7th day. Verse 15. On the 7th day, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before. But this time they went around the town 7 times. The 7th time around, as the priests sounded the long blast on their horns, Joshua commanded the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the town. When the people heard the sound of the ram's horns, they shouted as loud as they could, and suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. Notice the priests carried the ark, they carried God's presence, and the people followed. They followed God's presence. And in a short time, 7 days versus months, they captured the city. It required following God's presence in what he did, what he said to do. And they blew shofars. They declared their promise. The Lord has given us the city with a shout. And it's actually a shout of joy, not a battle, war, gladiator cry. It was a joyful shout. See, throughout the Bible, when that word for shout is used, it's connected to times of celebration and joy. For example, 2 Samuel 6, verse 15. It says, so David and the whole house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and the sound of trumpets or shofars. Isn't that amazing? That was a celebration time, and they're shouting and releasing a sound into the atmosphere. Again, in Psalms 89:15, it says, blessed are those who know the joyful shout, who walk, O Lord, in the light of your presence. And Psalm 100, verse 1, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. See, the blowing of trumpets or shofars is often connected to declaration. There's something about making a sound that is necessary. So have you ever had a day where it's just, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed or something like that? It's hard to get out of that without making a sound. But if you'll start declaring and releasing over your life promises of God, it changes something on the inside of you. You have to hear it in order to step into it. A sound has to be released, and actually praying in tongues out loud is also connected to this. So as the people marched around Jericho, nothing happened until the people declared with a shout their promise. So if you have a promise, you will face opposition. But victory is yours because you follow God's presence, make joyful declarations, follow what he says to do, you will see victory. See, God wants to partner with you to advance you into the promise that he has for you. And it comes by making declarations and shouts of joy. Some people have this thought. They say, I'll be joyful once I get the promise and once everything works out the way I want. But see, joy is what gives us strength to defeat the enemy, to actually defeat what's coming against us. Spending time in God's presence leads to joy because joy is a powerful weapon. So I want us today to prophetically start taking ground with our promises. I really feel like as a church, we are called to advance, yes, as a church, but as individuals, you have a promise that God has put on your life. He has a calling for your life. There are people beyond these walls that need to hear about Jesus. They need to see and experience God's presence through you. And so to take our promises, it is not a wilderness posture. Wilderness posture was God provided for me every day, right? They were just camped in the wilderness. They received the manna. They received the quails that came. But in the promised land, God made them partners with his presence. They were called to actually move forward with God's presence and start declaring and taking the promises that they were given. And so they had to do that in boldness. There were giants in the land. They couldn't kind of sit there and wait for God to kill the giant. They had to become bold and with strong declaration go after the things that God gave them. Is that making sense? Do you understand that? So I want you to just take a moment, because being a presence person isn't like building a siege ramp to your promise. That takes time and a long time. Now, I know sometimes God calls us to things that do take a long time, but I feel like there's been promises in our lives that we haven't advanced in. We've been circling, and it's time to actually take ground. And I want to invite you to do that today. So I want you to imagine with me, with God, if you were to go all in this year with the promises God's given you, and if you were to start going after them in declaration, in prayer, in joy, and doing whatever he shows you to do, what would the newspaper headlines say about you 1 year from now? Think prophetically, and I want you to see headlines over your life. Like this whole business gave their lives to Jesus and started a church. What could it be? And then I want you to hold on to those headlines. So if you felt like there's something you could imagine that God would do with your life, I want you to hold on to that and even write it down. Put it on your phone. Because I believe God wants to partner with you to take that land. I would love to see in 2026 some of those promises being fulfilled. Breakthrough in businesses, breakthrough in home life, children coming home who know Jesus. So those of you who are here on our opening day in 2023, you know that as we were having our service, the train on the train tracks outside, chugga chugga choo choo, it went by, and it let out these loud blasts. Do you remember that? It was so interesting that God would open our first service. We rarely hear that, by the way, but our first service, it was there. A loud sound was made, and I believe that was a prophetic sound that opened us up into the season God had for us. And as we've been praying just about our next season, we felt like we needed to have another loud sound. And so I've asked Matt, who is the head of our production team, he's one of the coaches on our dream team, to come. And we've asked him to blow the shofar as we start a new year as a church. See, it's a prophetic sound that releases God's power. And it releases like a yes over some of the things that God said over us as a church, but also for you as individuals. God wants to allow you to receive the things that he's had for you. And so I want us to receive when he blows this over us, just as if you would receive it as if someone was praying for you. So I want you to be hands out in a receiving posture. Because I believe that the sound that he's releasing is going to do something in your spirit where it will bring your spirit to attention, and you're going to be able to start in a new season, like a new way of receiving from God with a focus on his presence. Does that make sense? So the shofar, this is what the priests carried and were blowing over Jericho. And so now we're prophetically just acting that out because we believe that a sound needs to be released to do the things that God is calling us to do in this next season. Are we ready? All right. Why don't you close your eyes and just posture yourself as if you would pray. Yeah, God, we thank you for your presence. I thank you that you're already here. And we just welcome you to move as he blows this over us. Did you feel that? Yeah. So I want to end our service today with, I guess, kind of like a prophetic act in a sense. We're going to go through a promised land blessing tunnel because I want us, we've received that sound blown over us just as the walls of Jericho were blown as they went around. But now I want us to actually walk through this blessing tunnel and receive just more empowerment, more joy, more just of God's presence as we step into the things that God's called us to take. So I've asked our School of Transformation students, would you come up and make a tunnel for us here at the front?